Okay, welcome back. Those of you that are back for the second part of contract training, which will be the purchase contract. So I'm going to start generically, and I'm going to be a little sensitive to the new ones, to the new agents, whom are not as familiar with dot loop as the rest of us. So again, we're creating a loop. We create a loop here, and we are adding, uh, we're going to add a buyer, right? Because we did listing contracts earlier. So now we have a buyer. So we're going to call this person buyer one. Continue. And because we're working with the buyer, we're going to pull over the TAR buying templates because we're in Tuscaloosa versus being in the Birmingham area. There would be the TAR, right? So hit continue. You can put a photo of the buyer if you like, or if you already have a home that the buyer is interested in, you can put a photo there as well. You can go to your photo library, take a photo if the buyer is there before you, or you can choose the file. I'll click done. And that's our buyer's file. Again, we call our files loops. So the first thing I would do, if that buyer is already pre-approved, I would go here and I would put, I would make this I would make the status a pre-offer because it's not approved yet. And if they pre-approved, let's say they got a pre-approval for 400,000. Well, I love big numbers. Let's say a half a million. I'll go ahead and enter that amount there. And let's say they have to purchase. They absolutely have to purchase before the end of the year. I would start my closing date here as typically we don't know the closing date until we have found a property and negotiate that contract, et cetera, et cetera. But if my buyer if they have to be in a property before the end of the year, I'm going to go ahead and give myself a window of opportunity to close 2 weeks before the end of the year. So I'm going to go ahead and put the 19th. You can put the end of the year if you want to, because you're going to end up changing the date anyway. But you're just putting a date there so it can trigger a memory in regards to when they absolutely have to be in something. So I'll go view loop, and there we go. All of the documents that I would need for this buyer, the majority of them, I would say at least 8/10 of what I need will be here. Now, notice, and I didn't show this in the other class, we have what we call a stacking order. Um, and the stacking order is a 3-tier subfolders. So folder one would be the buying documents, folder two would be the contract documents, and then folder three would be the closing close documents. This is at the end. So we're not dealing with this yet. And whenever you have too many files up and you just want to get some of them out of your way, you can just click it one time and it will minimize. All right. So for now, we're working with this buyer and we're talking about a buyer's contract, right? Well, hopefully we have already gotten the recad done, right? Hello, somebody. Hopefully the buyer has already signed the recad. Hopefully they did that with their buyer presentation. The next training would be a buyer presentation, how to take a buyer and to take them from doc one all the way through, educate that buyer, and swear your allegiance to that buyer and have that buyer committed to only you to buy home through. So we'll do that next. But for now, we're just talking about a purchase contract. So have the buyer to sign the recad again, and then after you have recatted the buyer, We will go to what? Well, let me go through another step. During the buyer presentation, these all of these documents you will go over with the buyer during the buyer's presentation. And pull it up a little. So the recap, the buyer acknowledgement statement, the anti-fraud disclosure, expected expenses, definitely expected expenses, because you're going to get later on in your deal and the buyer had no idea that these type of expenses were expected on a typical transaction, right? Because they're ignorant. Most buyers don't know real estate like you do. And then, of course, this is when they hire you. You are unemployed by that buyer until they sign this buyer agency agreement. And then, of course, you have the TAR, transactional brokerage. That's if you are in house, because we don't do dual agency here. If you're writing a contract for a property that's listed by REE 101, you will do a transactional brokerage with that buyer, even though you have done a buyer agency, becoming the agent for that buyer. You cannot be an agent for two. You can't serve two masters. So this document has to be signed if it's an in-house listing, because you can't be a dual agency. That is my, remember, I'm the chief officer of risk management for RE 101. Okay. That just means I'm covering my butt. So, okay. So we'll go over all of these documents during a buyer presentation, right? So for the purpose of contract writing, let's just go right into writing a contract or filling in the blanks. So we're going to minimize the buying documents because we've already gotten those signed during the buyer presentation, right? That hour where you brought them in, you set them down, and you presented yourself to them, your services, and you've gone over everything they need to know about buying a house, right? All right. So let's go to the TAR purchase contract. Again, we do not write contracts. We basically fill in the blanks. Our contracts are written by attorneys. Thank God. That way we don't have to go to court every time we do a deal. They are pre-printed documents and they are standardized through the National Association of Realtors or through Alabama Association of Realtors or through Tuscaloosa Association of Realtors. So they're standardized documents that whom you're doing business with in those regions are familiar with those documents. Okay. So let's go to the purchase contract. So with the purchase contract, the undersigned is the buyer or buyers. If you have two buyers, both names are to go here, right? And the undersigned, um, if you don't know the seller's name, most of you will, because all you have to go to do is go to CRS and it'll tell you who owned the property. That's where you enter the seller's name, right? I prefer that you find out who owns that property because I do not like to rewrite contracts that has already been written. They've been written by attorneys for us to fill in the blanks for our legal defense. So when we start rewriting by lining out and Xing out, I'll show you that again when we come to this section. I do not like that. There is a contract or an addendum for everything you need to add to a contract. It's a better legal argument to add something to a contract versus to alter a contract. Okay. All right. I don't want to beat that horse anymore. So the property address, city, county, address of the property. Again, you're not entering this into the multiple listing yet, or you won't put this in as your listing. You'll only put in as a, it will be put in as a closed sale for you. So you're not concerned about these two areas here, the legal description and the subdivision. I would add the property ID number here under other identifying information. Please put it there. So for time purposes, 15 minutes, I'm going to make sure I set my clock so I won't prolong the training. Okay, so next we'll go to the purchase shall be This is the purchase price. If you get a counter offer, or when you submit this offer over to agents, here's where I am going to beat a dead horse. When you send this offer over to an agent 9 times out of 10 are going to line through this if they're countering you and put another price. I hate that. That is a lawsuit waiting to happen. However, just protect yourself as much as you possibly can by stating in some other documents or addendums or counter offers, if they won't sign them, that they altered the contract to reduce the purchase price, right? Everyone should initial this, of course. All parties, seller and buyer, right? There are two parties to the transaction, the seller and the buyer. We are just agencies. We're just representative, right? This is where you will enter the earnest money amount. The earnest money will be a part of this, right? Oftentimes nowadays, pretty standard in the market is not fixed by any stretch of the imagination. You'll see 500 or $1,000. If it's a property over a half a million, getting into the $1 million range, the you may see 2,000. They may request 2,000. Here, I state where the earnest money is going to be held. Remember, earnest money is also phrased as a deposit, but let's just keep it to earnest money. The earnest money will never, the check will never be made out to RE 101. And number two, look at the RE 101 policy on earnest money, on handling earnest money. It is not illegal to handle cash, but it is really frowned upon by not only RE1, I mean AREX, Alabama Real Estate Commission, but it's frowned upon by your broker. Do not accept cash. Have them to get a cashier's check or a personal check, right? Make that check, cashier's check, payable to the title company or the attorney that's involved in that transaction. Most of the time, you will not know that initially, but you will know it by the time that check is due. What I typically do, I typically add a box right here to say that the buyers, this shall be delivered to the buyer in trust. And I check right here and I put another box over this to say title company or attorney, right? This talks about the time is to be delivered. Typically, I think it's a good idea to write within so many days. I typically write within 72 hours or within 3 days, especially if you write it on a Friday. It is pretty standard for the industry to have the earnest money delivered to the title company or the attorney within 3 days. Pretty standard. So you're safe if you do that. All right, moving on. If there are only one seller, take out one of these boxes, and as you go through this, assign the box. You simply assign it like this. After you've already entered the let me reduce this. You've already entered the seller's email address and everything of that nature. So as you're going through taking out boxes, you just click on one to take it out. And mine is not popping up now. Why isn't it? Um, you'll get an X right here, and you click that X, and it'll delete one of those boxes. But if you need to assign these boxes, you'll click on it and hit and click Assign Fill. And you'll get a drop down here with the buyer that you're assigning it to. If there are two buyers, you want to keep both. All right. All right, moving on. If there are no financing contingency, if you have an all cash buyer, obviously you want to check this. This box would not be applicable to your contract. Do not check it. Do not have your buyers to initial any box that are not applicable to your transaction. Okay? I'll show you some other ones as we go through this document. But if it's a cash deal, you're going to click that. No buyer financing contingency. and then you put the calendar days here. Uh, Provided to the seller no later than blank calendar days. And basically, what you're saying here, buyer will pay cash for the property or otherwise have no financial contingency. Verification of funds, we call it a VOF. Verification of funds shall be provided to the seller not later than blank calendar days. That's acceptable. Again, when you see a number in parentheses almost next to where you can enter a number, you don't really need to add another number or enter the same number. Some people will put 3 days here. I think 5 days is reasonable because they may have to get a letter from their financial planner or a banker or something of that nature. So 5 days is reasonable. And then have the buyers to initial this. If it's not a cash deal, then obviously you're going to click buyer financing contingency. You will not check that box. State the type of loan it is. If it's seller financing, you need to add a seller attachment or an addendum. Most of you probably don't even know what seller financing is, but anyway, um, the majority of the time it's either going to be VA, FHA, or conventional. The majority will be FHA, and then conventional will come second, and then VA will probably be your third state, and then of course USDA. All right. Moving on, buyer shall apply for financing and provide a letter or pre-approval not later than, I think 5 days is acceptable. However, you cannot even submit an offer nowadays without a pre-qualification letter. So even though you leave this blank, really, even though this section is here and they're going to check it, you can't submit this offer without it. No agents nowadays will accept an offer. Well, almost no agents will accept an offer, will accept a purchase agreement without a pre-approval. They want this with the offer nowadays. Okay. Um, the next section, buyers have so many calendar days from the agreement to exercise the right to cancel, terminate the agreement under this term financial contingency by providing written notice of cancellation to the seller. If the buyer does not exercise his right to cancel this agreement under the contingency by providing written notice to the seller as provided here, and then this financing contingency will have been waived. So basically, you're saying if you don't submit a cancellation and release within a specific calendar days, then you're waiving your cancellation rights of financing contingency. All right. Appraisal contingency, the next thing. This, let me go back to this paragraph. This in and of itself will not release your earnest money because there has to be a release and cancellation signed by both parties, the buyer and the seller. So just because this is applicable, this doesn't automatically get your earnest money back if you wanted to waive, if you wanted to cancel the contract, all right, within those calendar days. Appraisal contingency. Oftentimes are doing a seller's market, especially prior to 3 to 6 months ago when we were in a really hot seller's market. We were getting a lot of cash deals and they were waiving the appraisal, right? Why would someone waive the appraisal? They want the home. It's a tough market. Uh, it'll give my buyer a better chance of getting the properties, et cetera, et cetera. Most financing, almost all financing, there is a contingency there that the property has to appraise for the purchase price that you're paying for it, right? And there are circumstances that if it doesn't appraise, then the buyer can bring in the difference or the seller can come down on the price, come down to the appraised price. But we'll cross that bridge when we come to that river, right? So you'll check here regarding the appraisal contingency. This agreement is not, or this agreement is. Most of the time, you're probably going to check it is. This section here that you will initial just goes into more details about if the appraisal is less than the purchase price, blah, 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 blah. It states that this field must not be left blank. I would always put something here. The appraisal is less than purchase price. Buyer and seller shall agree to mutually accept resolution. I put 2 days. After the appraisal come in, we need to work out something in 2 days. Let's not prolong this. Let's try to work this out in 2 days, right? They should come up mutually agree to accept resolution within 2 days is what I typically put. And then, of course, closing and possession date, section 5. You can either do it here or you can do it here. It's a little redundant to do it in both places, but some people do. All right. Allocation of costs. And then, of course, you will have the buyers to initial as you go down. Allocation of costs. Here is where I see a lot of error. I mean, a lot. This area here, I see a lot of room for error and or litigation. So I would say when you come to this section, allocation of costs, seller to pay the following expenses. And this is how I typically like to word it. I'll give it to you in written form versus you trying to annotate or copy what I'm saying or even remember what I said. I typically like to say here, if my buyer's closing costs need to be paid, I would typically say seller to pay the following expenses. All of buyer's recurring and non-recurring closing costs, right? To include prepaids. All of buyer's recurring and non-recurring closing costs to include prepaids, hyphen, all inclusive. Meaning whatever amount we put there will be all inclusive. And then you can put a dollar amount up to, if it's a typical FHA transaction, an FHA buyer's closing costs typically going to be about 3%. So that's $6,000. So I would put up to $6,000. And don't put just $6,000. Put up to $6,000. Give the seller a break if it doesn't reach that. This next section is also could be very litigious. Buyer to pay the following expenses. All of buyer's normal closing costs, with the exception of those being paid by seller. See above. All of buyer's normal closing costs and expenses, except those being paid by sellers. See above. Okay? Moving on. We're on page 3 of 10. And of course, we know what agency is. If you are a transactional agent, you will be the listing company and you will also be the selling company. So if you're transactional, you will check transactional under one of these, depending on which side of the transaction you started on, right? If you're the listing agent, then you're going to be the transactional broker for the buyer if you write the contract. But both will have RE 101 here. Never this one. An agent of both the seller and the buyer. Never. Never, 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 never. Never. Did I say never? Never. All right? We don't do dual agencies here. That is a lawsuit waiting to happen. And as Chief Risk Officer of RE 101, we do not do dual agency, nor do we collect earnest money. We do not have a trust account. Okay? All right. Initial. This talks about recap, again, that you've already disclosed. Have it initial. Tax proration, yes. Always have your buyers to initial tax proration. When we come to title evidence, the title ensures good and merchantable title to be issued in the form of owner's title insurance and or mortgage title insurance. If there is a mortgage involved in the transaction, both boxes must be checked. If there's no mortgage involved in the transaction, only this box. You don't have to check this mortgage title insurance if there's no mortgage involved. Meaning, if it's a cash deal, no, you don't need that. This cost shall be the cost of the seller, is what I typically will put. Because this is typically a seller's cost anyway. If I'm selling you a property, I should be able to give you clean title or to ensure you that you're getting good. I can give you some evidence of good title that you're getting on this property that is not, it's free of liens and encumbrances and things of that nature, right? The property is sold and is to be conveyed subject to any mineral or mining rights not owned by the seller. Buyer does or does not request an enhanced policy of owner's title insurance. The majority of the time, you will put does. I'm sorry, does not. If it's a troubled property, if you just see some issues with that property going in, you've known some history of that property and there was a lot of litigation on the property, or it seems like there was some just any issue. If you had any red flags in your bowels, in your gut about this property, you may want to tell the buyer or recommend to the buyer that they may want to get an enhanced policy of owner's title insurance. Typically, your buyer is going to have to pay for that enhance, but it depends on the market. You can ask the seller to pay for it, and that's where that will come in at the very bottom of that paragraph. So I'm going to take about 20 more minutes and finish this document up. Will give us a 45-minute class. Property inspection, major area right here. And I'm going to say this before I even go into this. We have a waiver for just about everything. Home inspection, home warranty, septic, well inspection, survey. We have a one-page waiver with all of those inspections or requirements on it. And if your buyer, they're not requirements. But if your buyer chooses not to have either of those, submit a waiver of those services that they are not choosing to select. Okay? That's, again, chief risk officer of yourself. That will prevent any liabilities on your part on our part. Well, the majority of liabilities. People will still sue for anything, but cover yourself, over disclose, over waiver. Just about anything you can waive yourself out of, just over disclose. Seller agrees to ensure that all utilities at the property, well, it may be an abandoned property, so address that. Make sure that's addressed up front. Seller may not want to initial this if it's an as-is property, or there's some other issues with it where the utilities can't be on, like a gas leak or things of that nature. So that needs to be addressed with the seller or with the listing agent, but have the buyer to initial it until it's addressed. If they do not initial that on accepting your offer, you need to address it in writing. Okay. Buyer elects to purchase a property with. So here's where we're getting into as is properties and properties with mortgages on it. The majority of the time, you cannot finance a home in an as is condition. The majority of the time, there are some circumstances like conventional loans and a type of FHA loan that you do that they'll allow you additional money to fix it up, right? But the majority of the time, you cannot buy an as-is property with the loan. So no inspection contingency. If someone is buying an as-is property and it's so stated in the listing agreement, your buyer's got a great deal, they are cool with everything, No inspection contingency. You got to get them to sign a waiver. Plus, they're going to initial right here as well that they're not asking for any inspections. But I want a separate inspection waiver as well, as is with the right of inspection. So you can buy it as is with no inspection, and you can buy it as is with an inspection. That basically means I'm going to buy the property as is. I accept it as is, but I still want to see what I'm getting, because I may want to back out if the foundation is caving in. Okay. So make sure you represent your buyers properly and you explain these to your buyers if you ever get into a situation where they want to do it as is. I personally would do it as is with the right of inspection. Just let me see it anyway, and let me decide if I want to close this deal or not. All right. Right of inspection with repairs. The majority of contracts will have right of inspection with repairs. Um, it is probably reasonable about 14 days, especially in a seller's market when it was very busy. Some sellers didn't want to wait that long. They were countering this to about 7 days. Um, but I think 14 days is reasonable, right? Termite. Not all lenders require a clear termite. Make sure you address that properly. Buyer does not require wood infestation report. I would say does. I would just ask for it. But you have to counsel your buyer properly and make sure you don't lose the deal for your buyers. You have to explain these things to your buyer and say, hey, the more we ask for, the more issues it's going to cause the sellers, the less chance we have of getting this property without a counter, right? Because when you write an offer and you submit it and the seller doesn't accept it, that means that offer is basically voided. If they counter that offer, it's basically voided. So they will counter your offer, creates a voided offer, right? All right. Next, termite agreement. So this is separate. This is wood infestation report, right? WIR is how it's the acronyms for it. And this is termite agreement. I would always ask for, said seller does not have a kind of an annual termite agreement. I typically say does. I don't care what the seller told me. I would say he has it. And if seller has it, then this will transfer to the buyer. And if you want the seller to pay for it, you will put that cost there. Sewer and septic. Be very careful here. Make sure you know if the property has a sewer or a septic tank, because if it has a septic tank and they do not want to do an inspection and or a clean out, I need a waiver. Make sure there's a waiver in the file for it if they choose not to do an inspection. Lead-based paint, pre 78, prior to 78. If it's 78 and you want to do it anyway, don't do it. I'm a big fan for over disclosure, but some things you're opening up a can of worms. So I would say don't do it. Survey, flood zones, easement, yes. Buyer initial. I haven't come to a section yet where I recommend that a buyer should not initial. I've stated earlier, have a buyer to initial everything that's applicable to his offer or your transaction. Same thing with zoning. School zones, yes. Don't get into that. I don't care if they don't have any kids. It's irrelevant. Initial it. Initial. Waterfront lots. If the property, if there's no water there, don't even initial that. It makes no sense. It's not even attributable to your contract. Home warranty. Here's another section where you can put that you want the expense for the home warranty. Make sure you counsel your buyers that every time they ask for something, uh, they have a less chance of getting their offer accepted. However, nowadays it's a little bit, we have a better chance to ask for something now than we did 3 to 6 months ago. Here we're getting into the repair section. Make sure you go over this section in quite details. Seller shall communicate the response to the buyer's request for repairs within, I like the 2 days. Don't change it if you've got a number over here. I like the 2 days, right? Within 2 days, right? Here's the other area I would recommend that you do not change. If the parties are unable to negotiate a satisfactory agreement regarding the repairs, that needs to be the buyer's response shall be communicated to the seller within 2 days that the buyer wants to cancel this agreement, right? I would leave it at 2 days. But make sure you go over this section quite well with your buyer, right? And then we have the very last sentence. If the seller agrees to make any repairs as requested by the buyer, buyer and seller shall execute a repair agreement, which is a separate document, a separate agreement, uh, which shall be attached hereto and incorporated herein. Any repairs requested by the buyer shall, any repairs requested by the buyer under this paragraph and a repair agreement, if any, are to be paid for by the, make sure you state who's going to pay for it. We typically put the seller here, and we typically don't put an amount here. But if you feel so inclined to put an amount, make sure you are accurate with that. We typically put to be agreed between parties. All right, we're closing out now. Buyer and seller here and acknowledge and agree. Yes. Have your buyer sign to initial this. If it's not new construction, do not initial that. Assessments, yes. Risk of loss, yes. Improvements and impertinence. And then we get to this section. This is additional items to remain as part of the purchase price at no additional value. This is where I typically state, and one of the reasons why I ask to add an active copy of the listing agreement or the MLS printout to your loop. And I will state here, per that MLS number, every listing has a number. Per the MLS number, as of the date that I write the contract, and I'll so state that date. All items, and then if it's some items that they have mentioned or talked about that are not in that listing agreement, I will put those there as well. All right. Items to be excluded from the sale. These are items that your buyer absolutely want to have removed. Let's say, for instance, a trampoline or an old barn or an old storage building. They have absolutely no use for it. Go ahead and ask the seller to exclude it from the sale. And if they're going to exclude it from the sale, go ahead and state that they're not only to exclude it, but to remove it. So I would say the old barn or the old storage building, exclude and remove. Negotiate everything up front. Don't assume and get to the end of the transaction. Additional provisions. Well, here, those things that are additional, here is typically where we put the title company. We can name the title company because buyers should have that choice. However, the buyers should have the choice of where they close. However, the buyers are not paying for it. Typically, the sellers are paying for it. So most listing agents, prima donnas, will state their own title company that their preferred title company or attorney that they want to close here, regardless of what you put here. But if we have any control of it, we typically say Equity Title or one of our other preferred title companies or attorneys. And just explain to them that facsimiles and or DocuSigns are considered legal signatures, et cetera, et cetera. And that's it. Have everyone to sign. You sign over here as a witness, and that completes the impromptu training and summarized version of the purchase contract. All right. Peace.